Hi, everybody. Ever wonder why you think the way you do and why other people don't understand your points of view or what you're trying to say? Today on the I Care About You podcast, we are talking about cognitive biases that shape your thinking. We discuss all different types of biases. This is a two-part series, so part one today, part two next week, where we'll cover a fair amount of biases, but there are a lot. We will discuss how they work, why you might be using them to support your own beliefs and to define things, even when you might be wrong. This can help you better understand your relationships and why people think the way they do and why you think the way you do. Knowing these thought mechanisms can dramatically help you move through life, navigate relationships, and succeed at the workplace. Being able to understand why people think the way they do gives you an angle in understanding their thought process and where they're coming from, and it will lead you to being a better communicator overall if you have a point you're really trying to get across or you really want to be heard. The biases you use can impair your better judgment. A bias can come from things you learned as a child. It can come from something you formed from an experience or a series of experiences that you had. It might be the consequence of being treated a certain way. Biases can come from stereotypes and misinformation. Biases can be formed out of fear or self-protection. We come to biases in many ways. The trick is to see the biases when you notice one. Many of our biases are unconscious or internalized and can be hard to see. Racism or any type of othering is an example of how you can internalize a bias so deeply you don't even realize that there might be another side to that, and you cling to something that isn't serving you or the population in general. Why do we create a bias? Research suggests that we take in more than we can process. Our unconscious processing abilities are roughly 11 million pieces of information per second. However, according to Timothy Wilson's book, Strangers to Ourselves, conscious processing is only about 40 pieces per second. So it's not that our brains are insufficient. Rather, we are somehow choosing what to process and what we understand of what we're processing. Our conscious mind is like a holding tank for information we think that we may need later on. And in order to remember certain things, we let go of the other stimuli in the environment. We have all been lost in a project or a conversation, and we finally look around to realize that time has ticked by without us realizing it. In order to concentrate on the project or the conversation, we let other stimuli we are receiving go or essentially be unregistered, such as the light and temperature associated with the passing of time. It's a mechanism for understanding things. We can't stop with everything we see and contemplate it, so we use these biases to quickly put things in order of what they are. In order to process things quickly. We employ a number of techniques to do this, but one of them is our biases. Biases are preconceived ideas we have about how things should be. We use this knowledge to quickly decipher how we feel and what we think about things we choose to notice. We may use the knowledge to quickly think of, categorize somebody, or we might use the knowledge to quickly judge somebody or something that's happening, which is not necessarily a good thing all the time. These biases can be useful, as I said, but they can also be problematic and limiting. As life goes on, these biases may become obsolete or offensive or very limiting to you as a human being. They may begin to do more damage than good if you aren't able to grow and shift as new ideas come into your frame. Imagine how silly it would be if you kept the bias of childhood that strangers are dangerous. How would you even function as an adult? How would you have friends, coworkers? How would you network? How would you have relationships? How would you have acquaintances? Your ability to form relationships would be really limiting. But it's true that some of us retain childhood biases throughout our lives, even if they hurt us. Many of us perceive biases as a truth because it's so ingrained in us. But biases are not truths. They're just something we think, something we can change if we choose to do so. So let's look at a few types of biases we might encounter from one time to another. You might see them in yourself, or like I said earlier, you might recognize them in someone else, and that will give you some insight into how they're perceiving and taking in information, allowing you to communicate with them in a way that allows you to be heard. So the first one I want to talk about is confirmation bias. I did a podcast on this phenomenon that you might remember more in the framework of negative biases that we have. So a confirmation bias, we tend to give more credit to information that supports our current beliefs. Confirmation bias means that we give more credit or truth to information that reinforces the things we already think or believe. This might look like a lot of things. You only pay attention to information that confirms your beliefs. This can be seen in politics or heated issues such as climate change. You're only really seeing your side of it, and you're rooted in it being completely right. Only following people on social media or listening to certain news channels or reading certain news outlets that share your points of view, not considering all of the facts and weighing out all the options and facts and all sides when you are dealing with trying to decide how you feel about something. Confirmation bias might be a tool folks use because it helps preserve self-esteem and feeling that you are right, smart, or accurate. So by looking at these things that reinforce how you already believe, it can help you feel good about who you are for these brief moments of time. It can give you excuses not to get out there and be with others who might think differently. It shortcuts your decision making when you do not have to consider all the sides of an argument. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people use confirmation bias when deciding on things. And we all have these biases. Some people just use them more than others. The problem with using confirmation bias is that it can lead to poor choices and an inability to listen to opposing views or even communicate with others who hold different opinions. It can limit you to growing and learning. It can create beliefs that isolate you away from others and limit your ability to really think creatively. So if you're in a relationship with somebody and they have a different point of view because it's an argument and you are implying this bias that you're right, then you're not hearing what the other person is saying. And that can be damaging to the relationship in extreme ways. Over time, the person who never feels like you hear their side or you can be open to how they see things can lead to them exiting the relationship. It can isolate you in so many ways. I have seen many people that get really angry at folks that have different opinions, and that creates isolation in itself because anger is an isolating emotion. People don't really want to engage with it so much so. And if you're chronically angry at every little thing, it's very hard to be around you for a long period of time or to get in a deep relationship with you because you simply will not see another side to anything. So the person either has to conform to who you are and what your beliefs are and let go of who they are, or they let go of you. Either thing is not good. Things that can help you reduce the impact of confirmation bias include being open to hearing other people's opinions and specifically looking for and researching opposing views, reading the full article, not just the headlines and assuming what it is, questioning the source and doing research yourself to see if it's reliable. All those things can help when you feel like you've let confirmation bias get out of control. The second bias I want to talk about is hindsight bias. This is sometimes referred to as "I knew it all along" phenomenon. We tend to think situations are more predictable than they are. This might look like you knew all along what was going to happen in a situation. For example, what would happen in a plot of a movie, or who would win a sporting event, or who would be elected. It could be looking back on a test you took and thinking you knew all the answers to the questions you got wrong, but for some reason you wrote down the wrong thing. Or that you predicted a historical event would happen after it did. Basically, hindsight bias makes us believe that we can predict things more than we can. This sometimes can lead people to take on unwise risks. It also creates this personality kind of shift where people always feel like, "I knew it, I told you so" kind of mindset, and that can be very irritating to people. The third bias I want to talk about is an anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is the tendency to be overly influenced by a piece of information we hear. So this might look like at an auction type event, the first price set aloud typically becomes the anchoring point for further negotiations and what everything else is based on thereafter. That's a very classic one. Another example might be a doctor's first impression of a patient becomes the anchoring thought that can incorrectly influence all subsequent assessments of that patient's health. I had this happen to me, for example. I was having surgery on my foot. I was getting ready to have the surgery, and the anesthesiology just was talking to me. And I told them, I always wake up during surgery, always. And he made a snap judgment about me that I was just trying to get more or something of that nature, based on my appearance, I guess. And of course, I woke up during surgery. And as a consequence of waking up during surgery, I am now legally disabled. That is a prime example of a doctor making a first impression about the patient and letting that guide their judgment. This can lead to poor choices and make it difficult for people to consider other important factors. It's also one of those really ugly things about judgment, how people will make snap decisions about certain folks they just met, and then those people can never escape that initial first judgment, even if it's incorrect. The next one I want to talk about, number 4, is the halo effect. This is known as what is beautiful is good principle. We tend to think that folks we define as good looking are more admirable, viable, smarter. This can be seen in marketing because marketing really preys on this bias to sell products. This can look like thinking people who are good looking are smarter, kinder, funnier, and than less attractive people. It can also mean that when you see somebody you define as less attractive, you automatically have a judgment on them that might not be true. Believing that products marketed by attractive people are also more valuable, thinking that a political candidate who is confident must be intelligent and competent just because they're appearing very confident and maybe even a little bit snarky or something of that nature, you perceive them as being smarter and more capable than somebody who is not exhibiting those things when they're up on the stand giving a speech. Bias can have a powerful impact. For example, job applicants perceived as attractive are more likely to be viewed as competent and smart and qualified for the job. People are discriminated against simply due to looks and what a particular population defines as good looking, beautiful, or maybe even considers as viable. Again, this really plays into discrimination a lot. So number 5, the last one I'm going to talk about today, is a misinformation effect. Misinformation effect is the tendency for memories to have a heavy influence on things that happened after the actual event itself. You may think your memory is crystal clear and set in stone, but researchers have found out that memory is surprisingly susceptible to even very subtle influences. And I talked about this in the podcast on manipulation and relationships, learning to see manipulation in your relationships. This is really common. A manipulator will retell your past to you in order to alienate you from people or situations that might be part of your personal history. So manipulative people may influence your memories by retelling a false narrative over and over to you until you believe it. Research suggests simply asking a question about an event can change someone's memories of what happened. Using adjectives when asking the question might also affect how you remember the event. For example, being asked, "How was your mother?" when you came back from a visit is different opposed to saying, "How was your mother? Is she still depressed?" That might have a profound effect on your memory of visiting her. Watching media or documentaries also affect how people remember an event that happened in the past, usually an historical event. If they rewatch it on TV or a screen of some kind, they might shift their own perspective of the memory if they were there. Hearing other people talk about a memory from their perspective can change your memory of the event. The effects of misinformation can range from trivial to more serious. It might cause you to misremember something you thought happened at work, or it might lead to someone incorrectly identifying the wrong suspect at a criminal case. And as I said before, it can also profoundly affect your relationships with others if somebody is using this misinformation effect to retell your past to you in order to villainize certain people that you might know. This often happens when a manipulator is really trying to get you to dislike your family, discredit people in your family or your close friend group, to distance you from your family and friend group in order to get you more isolated so they can keep you in the relationship. So be leery of that and be on the lookout. If you feel like that's happening to you, recognizing that somebody's trying to give you misinformation to change your memory, and that will help you retain your own beliefs about your memories. As you can see, these biases influence much more of our thoughts and ultimately our decision making. Most of us imply more than one bias in order to decipher the incoming stimuli and to be able to develop judgments and beliefs that we use to then govern and justify our behavior. Many of these biases are inevitable. We simply don't have the time to evaluate every thought and every decision that presents itself. Understanding these biases are very helpful in learning how they can lead you to poor decisions in life or to make misconceptions about others. They shape how we view people, groups, identities, cultures, and races. Our biases can profoundly affect our ability to flow through life, to learn, and to change. They can also hurt others in the process. Learning to recognize our biases can profoundly affect our success in life. As I said, it can help you to have better communication styles, and it can also help you recognize what biases others are using in particular conversations that you are having and be able to kind of meet them at a place so you can be heard. So I hope this helps you to figure out a little bit more about yourself and possibly the people you know, and to understand why people do the things they do. Understanding can foster grace and compassion, and we all need a little bit more of that in our lives for ourselves and for each other. So remember, compassion isn't an excuse for bad behavior. It is a profound act of kindness and love, and understanding where people are coming from can get you a little bit closer to that space. I'm not saying everyone deserves your compassion or that you feel like you can give it. That's for you to decide. But what I am saying is it gives you a space to look at somebody differently and to kind of take you out of this very frustrated space you are with that person, and to be able to look at them and go, oh, wow, that's a little sad, or that's a little challenging, or they're not going to have the relationships in life that they want because they're using this to really govern themselves so tightly. So it just gives you a space to find some kindness or love for someone else, some compassion in some way. So take care, my friends, and know that I support you and know that I love you. And I hope this helped you. Next week, we'll go over 5 more, and then we'll tie it all together. So if you liked it, please like and subscribe. It really helps me. And take care. Have a good week.